So, Russell, can you say today that you are now in the defense industry? Are you allowed to say that?
Yes.
Okay. And since you are, an expert in manufacturing, and we'll get to that, can you say what it is you're manufacturing?
Hard metal parts.
Hard metal parts for the
Yes.
defense sector. Okay, well,
Yes.
that's good. That's good. They
Is
should
it
be
hard?
hard.
It's up to you to decide if hard is an adjective or an adverb, right? But
We're soft launching Russell's announcement that he's joining the Build-A-Bear Defense Network.
Yeah.
Uh,
yes.
You see that Build-A-Bear is up 786% in 5 years. That's a stock to look at. That's a soft launch, a soft product. You make a lot of money. Russell,
Yes.
it's great to have you on the show. Joel, I'm always happy to
Thanks,
see you.
Jets.
But what I really would like to hear is the story of how a nightclub bouncer from New York City, like myself, you're the former nightclub bouncer from New York City, who's a fan of King Diamond, but used to go to L'Amour's in Brooklyn, as I did. Also, Josh Wolf from Lux Capital, also a big fan of L'Amour's. How you go from being a bouncer at a heavy metal club in New York City to Tesla, to the intermediate companies, to the defense industry today when we need you most. What was that path?
Well, I wasn't a bouncer. I took advantage of the bouncers. My grandfather owned the building that L'Amour's was built in, and I used to get free reign. And when I'd get my ass kicked in fights, which I invariably did because my mouth was bigger than my punch, I would go and run and see if the bouncers would help me out. But no, so growing up in New York and in Brooklyn, my family had a big welding shop. Honestly, like if you go back and you watch the Warriors come out and play. His shop is in one of the scenes in Warriors. L'Amour is right across the street. So my mom's family was always in manufacturing. My dad was a technical kind of big systems installation guy for AT&T. So I'd have been around technology a lot. Um, and I went to school for engineering, and I was too immature to do school full time. I went to Stevens for a year in Hoboken and kind of got kicked out because my proximity to the city led me down the wrong path. So I just bounced into manufacturing jobs and kind of got a night shift job, was going to school during the day and loved manufacturing. Like I was making good money, but all my friends were like, why do you work at night? I'm like, because I go to school during the day, and they were all hanging out and playing and partying. And I just started working.
what was
Fell into
that job? What was that
um,
factory?
my first factory job was a company called Glendale Protective Technologies. We made safety glasses, hard hats, welding shields, and we made welding protection for laser eye protection. And we actually made some stuff for DOD. If you guys remember back in the day, this is probably 87, 88. We got this mold in from Department of Defense, like real hush hush. And it was the visor for Navy pilots because an F-14 had buzzed like a Russian destroyer, and they blinded the pilot like 60% with an aiming laser. And the guy, the backseater, had to help him land the plane, but it ended the guy's career. And the company I was working for was doing optics and stuff like that. And we ended up making this face shield, and they custom compounded stuff that would block laser beams into this stuff. So that was my first exposure to like heavy manufacturing, like injection molding shop. And then, we did a little DOD work. So that was kind of fun. And then I bounced around jobs, injection molding. I moved out west, went to Phoenix, got into more plastics, got into working for a guy by the name of Craig, from Hoboken, real great guy. And,
Wait, his name is Craig from Hoboken.
well, I don't want to. Yeah,
That's
his name's Craig Dignaro. The guy's like he's a proxy dad for me. Great guy. Had color compounding businesses, so making dyes and plastics for all sorts of stuff. He was a Hoboken guy by way of Chicago, so we got along. And I just got into manufacturing, and I loved it. I just loved machinery. I loved every night was a challenge. Every night I'm a masochist. Every night was a punch in the face when you go run a shift. So there was never an easy day in manufacturing, and that's kind of who I am. And I ended up sticking around for it. And I did a lot of different plastics jobs and then fell into a really good career in high-speed packaging. I started out here where I'm at in Phoenix now, got into making things like Gatorade bottles, and yogurt, spaghetti sauce, and peanut butter. Like I tell people, if it's a paste, a liquid, or goop on a shelf in a Walmart, a Safeway, or a Kroger, I've made the container for it. And that ended up being a job where I ran maintenance, engineering, and projects on 4 continents for 70 factories, right? So it ended up being a big job. And I did that till like 2014. So that was almost 20 years. And, I had one VP and he was a South Philly Marine. He was a Tony Soprano meets a Marine corporal and big guy. I'm 6'4", he's 6'5", and he always stood taller when I was around, right? And, hiking his pants up. He was an interesting dude, this dude by the name of Joe Cummins. And I worked for him for 15 years straight. And when he retired, I was like, all right, I'm done with plastics. And I saw a job at Tesla. And I was traveling and I applied and they were looking for an engineering manager. And I was actually in Modesto driving between 2 factories that I happened to have engineering domain over. And I got a call and I looked at my caller ID and it said Tesla recruiting. So it was the first and only phone call I've ever pulled over for in my life. And I pulled over and there's a recruiter by the name of Jason. And I absolutely just browbeat him to get me an interview the next day. He's like, to set up a phone interview. And we'll talk to the director. I was like, no, I don't do phone interviews. Let's do in person. I was like, I'm in Modesto. I'll be here for another couple of days. And so I kind of harangued him. I was like, please check. And he finally checked with the director. He's like, all right, come in 5:30 tomorrow night. And it's already 6 o'clock in Modesto. So I drive to Men's Warehouse, buy 2 jackets, pay the tailor like $200 cash to stay that night and tailor the jacket for me. While he's tailoring the jacket, I went and got a haircut because I'm not always this pretty. And, so when I showed up and I interviewed with this guy at Tesla, Andy Hamilton, and we just hit it off. Andy was kind of up through the ranks, started as a forklift driver, and he was manufacturing director of powertrain, and powertrain was the bottleneck, and he just didn't understand the factory dynamics well enough. So he was looking for a partner and he hired me to run engineering for him. And Andy he still is a great guy. He's actually with JB at Redwood Materials now, but, and Andy and I clicked it off and Andy's like, just run this thing, man. And, so I picked it up, ran it and ended up being director of powertrain in like early 2015. I was there like 4 months and they gave me the whole department and Andy moved on to solve another problem in the factory. So find myself 2015 running 1,500 indirect reports at Tesla, making a third of the value of the car. And it was fun. Like all the things that people had taught me, your team, right? Your presence on the floor, your situational awareness in manufacturing. It goes in any factory. You drop me in a factory and I could probably make it better. I could go semiconductor, I'd go beer, but go ahead.
Well, okay, Russell, a lot has happened in the first 4 minutes of this podcast. Well, let's get to that. All right. So 2014, you landed Tesla, and
Yeah.
very soon you're the head of powertrain manufacturing. Is that correct?
Yeah. It was like 4 or 5
So
months.
let's paint a picture for the audience now. So at that time, there were only 2 vehicles to line up: the S and the X.
No, it was only one vehicle, the S, and it was only rear wheel drive. So I landed early S, the nose cone S's. We had only put out like 20 something thousand cars, 25,000 cars. And and powertrain, which was motors, batteries, electronics, chargers, cables, like all the underpinnings, was about a third of the value of the car, and it was bottlenecking the whole factory. And so I looked at that and what we had on the table, and I just ran the playbook of people and accountability and presence and planning and cleared those backlogs pretty quick. Like it ended up.
What was causing the backlog? What was the problem that you had to unproblem?
You're going to say something else, but some of the main problems were that it was accountability. When I went in there, I was running maintenance and engineering when I went in there, and I love it. I've been responsible for maintenance my entire career, so I am the roughest maintenance manager you will ever see. I'm like, look, your effing job is to keep equipment running. You're the only person on the floor that's allowed to put tools on a machine, so it's on you. That machine better run, right? That's your job. That is your bread and butter, to keep machines running and to repair them quickly, and not to smack talk machine operators when a machine operator wants to make an adjustment because they think something's not right. that person is there with good intentions. Machine operators don't have control over their world, where the maintenance and the operating engineers do. So I ran those guys really hard and like got repair times down, got maintenance programs installed, got equipment more reliable. And then the production folks, who at the time when I first walked in there, first 4 or 5 months, they worked for my boss. They actually had lines to start running, and then you can start to debottleneck and say, hey, we're not making enough on this glue process, or this welding, where we're welding terminals onto batteries, is unreliable. But if you have broken machines, you just can't see visibility into what your factory's actually doing. So I made the maintenance department harshly, very harshly, if you ask the maintenance guys there, fix things. And, and that's the thing, is you have to start just, you go in there with, 2 occasions, 3 unknowns, and you just have to start fixing things so that you can peel back the layers. That's in any factory.
There are only 2 things you need to know when it comes to coffee. The first is that McDonald's is always better than Starbucks. And the second is that if you are making coffee at home, you need fresh beans. I learned that from my friend Tonks, whose company, Yes Please, roast up a selection of affordable but very high quality coffee beans in Los Angeles every week and mails them to my home. Yes Please has a code DIETODAY, DIETODAY, to get 15% off your first order. Make it in a cheap coffee maker. Make it in a fancy espresso machine. They have a blend for espresso as well. Make cowboy coffee, it doesn't matter. If you grind freshly roasted beans, your coffee will be good. This is tea because this is a commercial, but their coffee is very good. I drink it every day, I promise.
Now, when you walked in there in 2014, you said they made about 25,000 vehicles that gone through everything.
yeah.
But like, where were some weak spots for them? Like, I know a lot of that's the history of the company is like engineering led, and they obviously stood a lot of it up. But like, it feels like your generation were some of the first to come in with outside manufacturing experience and say, hey, here's where we can really find some efficiencies. Like,
So Tesla is like, they were a decent sized company. I wouldn't, they were big, but they weren't like, you have this thing, you have this separation where you have design, and everybody thinks that's the clay model on the Toyota commercial, right? You're sculpting clay, but design is actually a 24-year-old guy out of Stanford, and he's the rear hinge guy. Like he that's his job, is rear hinges, the supplier, all that. He's designed it, right? So you have design, and they have production intent parts, and they test these parts, but you put this together and you've got 150, 180, 300 design engineers, or all their pieces have come together to make this vehicle or to make this battery pack. And then you have the manufacturing engineers that take the design and say, how am I going to get a battery cell to stand up, and I'm going to put it next to a cooling channel and transfer heat and make a process to do that. And those folks are brilliant. Like, Tesla's always attracted brilliance and still continues to. That's Elon's secret formula, is the best talent magnet in the universe, right? But they had never had strong counterparts in manufacturing. And I pushed back on the folks, and I was like, look, this is your effing machine and it's not running. My guys are doing the maintenance by the book. This is not happening. And, again, it just becomes 2 equations, 3 unknowns. It's like, you have to start defining what you have, even if the system is shitty. Let's nail down pieces. And I got quick trust of saying, hey, Russell's guys, the maintenance guys, they've turned this stuff. Okay, let me walk out onto the line and look at the problem they're saying. And then they would go, okay, now they're taking care of the machines. They're clean. The maintenance guys understand it a little bit better. And the engineers would come over and spend some time in the line. And it was this trust transfer. And again, it's about people. So when an engineer sees a machine that's scattered and dirty and maintenance guys aren't paying attention and operators allowed to change settings, the engineer's like, look, I built it. You guys are corrupting it. But when you go back and you respect the work that people did, because these are the children's that, these manufacturing engineers and design engineers birthed these children, right? And you're the nanny, and the kid's dirty and not fed, they don't want to believe you. But when they walk in and the kid's clean, fed, paying attention, they believe you. And then they're like, okay, let's fix some things.
All right, so you're a director of powertrain manufacturing, but at what point did you become the director of General Assembly?
Well, that was early 16. We had launched like that kind of soft launch, the launch event for the X. right? And there was Model X's going down the line, and if early Fremont, you had S and X assembly, so it was the old Toyota Tacoma line. So it's about 140 production stations in general assembly, and so they were supposed to be making 400 to 500 cars a day, and they were coming up short 125 cars a day total production, 160, some days 30. They'd get an X in the line, and something would happen. And since the line was kind of a sequential layout, you might have 3 Model X's in the line, but if an X got to a station, you just could not pass it. Every Model S behind it got jammed, right? And this happened for months. And it was like early Q1 or late Q1 of 16. And Elon had just had enough, and he made some
Well,
serious.
Russell, hold on a second. So just so we're clear, and some people in the
I
audience who
wasn't
don't know
running it.
this,
I'm
you
describing the
weren't
run
running
up.
it, but so if a production line is rolling
Uh-huh.
and a vehicle has a problem, the whole line stops.
At some
That's
point
how
in
it was.
time, yes.
Okay.
There are some built-in buffers, but
Is that the Toyota, the famous TPS, the Toyota production system? That's what that
yes,
is.
Toyota
Okay.
production system is defects need to be resolved on the line, right?
And
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, but that Fremont plant is the original GM and Toyota NUMMI plant,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that
Exactly.
was the history of that plant goes back to when GM went to Toyota in the 80s, I believe, and said, teach us what this whole Kaizen process is about. And they co-built that factory in the US. So
Yeah.
it is built for that specifically, so that if something stops, the whole line stops.
Yes.
So Russell, the TPS Kaizen works for Toyota because when the line does stop, the fix is done within minutes.
Yes, culturally, right? It's a cultural
Okay.
thing, right? You don't become Toyota, Taishi Oto, like I think that's the right way to pronounce his name, but that's like a 60, 70-year journey that they took to get there, right? And that there were a lot of Toyota folks. A lot of my friends from Tesla that are still there are still, they were Toyota folks, but it was a weird environment. At that time we had a lot of different people in the line. I was upstairs in powertrain, and I had debugged it, and I was training managers. So I was running really well. And up until early 2016, I had never met Elon. Like, I was running a third of the factory value, and he didn't bother with me because my stuff ran, right? So the problem would happen is they're having problems installing seats on Model X, or shock towers, or fitting rear deck lids when the glass was on, and the line would stop, and it just became this problem of who was where were the engineers, who's responsible, and it would just grind the progress to a halt. And we just weren't getting enough cars off the line because they were not resolving the issues fast enough, because they didn't really have the institution in Tesla. It had been under the NUMMI bones, but they didn't have that TPS, that system of rapid resolution, countermeasures and corrections.
So the fateful day comes. And you meet Elon, and
Well,
can you tell us?
is this a PG? Is this a PG podcast or an R-rated
No,
podcast?
we can beep out whatever you want, but
Uh-huh.
I want to
Yeah.
understand, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of legend around him, and there's some legend around you, and
Yeah.
I would love to know what that first conversation was like, because you were promoted, right?
Well, yeah. This is. I don't. I'd have to look back. It was like, I think it might have been like first few days of April, right? And 16, and so we're trying to squeeze X's off the line, and then I start hearing rumors. Hey, people are getting fired. And I'm talking to folks, and I'm like, director and director and director and VP and president quit. Like, I'm not going to name names, but like, it was kind of red wedding, right? And from Game of Thrones. And I'm like, oh wow. And I'm up in powertrain. I'm like, guys, just keep making parts. That's not us, right? And my HR director lady calls me, and she's like, hey, meet me in the cafe. And I sit down with her, and I was like, what's going on? And she's like, you heard about all the bad news. It's like, give me the details. So she tells me, and a number of directors had gotten let go, and a VP had gotten let go, and a company president who I had a lot of respect for, I think, quit in protest. So it was bad, right? And so I'm like, so what's going on? And she's like, we all talked, and we thought you were the guy that should probably go run General Assembly. And I looked at her and I was like, what do you mean? She's like, yeah, we want you to go talk to Elon about running General Assembly. And I was like, let me think about it. No. Right. And she looked at me. I was like, absolutely. She's like, why? I'm like, because that's like a second lieutenant World War II. That's like a 6-week life expectancy. I was like, I'm going to be dead in weeks. I was like, no one's going to last down there. And she's like, no, you got to go. And I was like, no, I don't want to do it. And after back and forth, and I'm being very G-rated with how I was telling her, no, she's a trooper. Like I don't want to say her name, but she's an absolute trooper of a lady. And I was basically telling her, F herself, I don't want this job. And she's like, after a half an hour of me protesting, she's like, well, you're meeting Elon down at Angel Island in 15 minutes. Which
What's Angel Island?
It was one of the conference rooms on the second floor. That was kind of a fishbowl glass conference room where he would set up shop when he was in Fremont. So I was like, oh, great. Well, it's nice knowing you because I know I'm going to get fired. And so I go down there and I get sat down in a room and Elon walks in. I stand up, shake his hand. I was like, how you doing, Elon? I'm Russell. And he's like, how long you been here? I said, a couple of years. And he's like, how come I haven't met you? And I said, my shit runs. And he did the Elon thing. He up to the left, Elon kind of thinking, calculating. You go, okay, makes sense, right? Like in his book, the reason why he hadn't met me is because my department was running and I was not a bottleneck in the factory. And he cares about everybody, but he's not going to put his attention on something that's running, right? So we start having a convo, and I kind of go into my background, what I was doing at Tesla, and then what I did before that, the manufacturing. And I was like, Elon, I don't think I'm your guy. I was like, I built 2 cars in my life. I was like, I built a 69 Mustang with my brother and a 71 Chevelle. I was like, I'm not a car builder. And he's like, yeah, but the team tells me you really understand factories. I was like, yeah, I could run any factory. I was like, but I'm not a car builder. He's like, well, we have car builders here. He's like, I need somebody who understands how to run a factory. A little bit of back and forth, and he's a great guy, like, and sitting there just kind of seat to seat, face to face, talking to him. And I was like, I want to do anything. I love this company. I love the job, Elon. I was like, I just don't know if I'm the right guy. He's like, well, I think you are. He's like, from what I'm heard. I was like, okay. I said, give me in one sentence what my job is. And he kind of does the E thing, up, left, look around, right? Considering he's a thoughtful guy. He's like, he does not care about pauses. And it was kind of quiet and uncomfortable, 35, 40 seconds. Then he just looks at me and he goes, Russell, I want you to make every car humanly possible, right? And I said, okay. I was like, I get that. I was like, I'm going to say that back to you. And if you tell me that's my job, I'll go do my damnedest. I'll drop dead trying to do that. So I said, okay, you want me to make every car humanly possible? And he said, yes. It's like, all right, I'll do it. And he's like, all right, great. So start now. Stood up, shook my hand, and said, start now. Right? And that was it. And he left. And there I am going, okay, great. Now I had moved my family about a year or so from, Phoenix to California. It's like, great. Now I got to find a new place to live because I'm getting fired. This is going to be terrible.
Did you have a sense at all of, in the room even, like, did you have a punch list of stuff where you're like, all right, I'm ready to go tackle these things because I've been waiting for somebody to ask me what I needed to do? Or is it like,
no,
I got to dive in real deep for a while?
So if you've ever been to Fremont, Fremont's up on the second floor, and that's the powertrain in Fremont at the time was on the second floor, and that was kind of the secret sauce factory. We had parts of the line down on the first floor, like E-beam, electron beam welding, different stuff that I ran, but the majority of my operations was 600,000 or 800,000 square feet of factory on the second floor, and that's all I cared about. I was like, look, that is my job. That is my life. I had all my direct reports. I had all my indirects, and I had all of my details were there. So I heard about problems in paint and stamping and, body and white welding and general assembly. I knew the scuttlebutt, and I'd go for the, I was at the management meetings every day of saying, hey, we're having problems on windshield install. But, look, I was head down a powertrain all the time. So when he said, go fix it, I was like, wow, okay, I know nothing what's going on down there. And, so I walk out of the room and, people like, what happened? I tell them, and I got a couple good people around me. And one of those, again, and is a guy, Andy Hamilton. Like I said, he works for JB Straubel at Redwood now. Great guy. And I love Andy. And Andy was like, hey, call these 2 guys. They're ex-GM. They know how to build cars. And I started getting people saying, hey, who's the right folks in the factory? And I had kind of carte blanche to go cherry pick people and say, look, I don't care if you're the key guy in body and white. I need you in GA. Or I don't care if you're this person here. And I went and I kind of cherry picked a couple people. and said, all right, we're going to start walking the lines. We're going to start talking about it. And I had picked a couple of good people on some recommendations, and we just started walking the line, and I just kind of engrossed myself and started doing the 21-hour days there, living around the clock, and, rapidly learned, okay, here was the bottlenecks, right?
There's a phrase that Elon said a few times, that like the factory is the product, right? Like, was
Absolutely.
that, which, makes sense. Like I buy it, but I've always wondered, is that something that he came to later? Like, I kind of doubt that was a learning he had maybe in 2014, 2016. Like,
No, I don't think in that sense. Like, so I think it took a while for that to coalesce in his head. And in that time from 16 to when I left in almost in late 17, I spent a lot of time talking about factories and while I would design in Model 3 and the Unstoppable Elliott Dreadnought. So I think that coalesced in his head during that period and as part of the Model 3 spin-up. I think what I saw when I got to General Assembly was there was an attempt to apply TPS, Toyota Production System, without the cultural underpinnings of it, right? It was like, hey, we stop the line, we root cause investigate, we fix things, we pass them back to design. And it wasn't happening. It was happening piecemeal. And it just wasn't in the institution of the company where, I've not been in a Toyota plant, all full disclosure, but the folks that did, like, look, they took line stoppages serious. When you pulled the rope, there was a stop rope above most lines. When you pulled that rope, plant manager was like, okay, what just happened to my line? Let us go fix that problem. That was a sacred thing. Like, that was opening a door on an airplane. You just don't do it, but it got everybody's attention where, at Tesla, it was strange. There wasn't a lot of discipline around the process. And so people were pulling the rope all the time, stopping the line, but it was never resulting in a lot of forward momentum saying, hey, every third time we pull the rope, we put a problem to bed. It was like, no, every time we pulled the rope, 600 people ended up stopping, and one of them had a screwdriver in his back pocket and sat in the car and ripped the seat and just caused a $1,200 defect. Or somebody leaned on the car and the supervisor let him show up to work in jeans versus our cotton work pants that had plastic buttons and no rivets. So you got folks scratching the car, right? There was no pull to the line. Every production line has an engine. And I'm going to quote a guy, Keith Milano, my right-hand man, right? He was a guy who taught me a lot. He was an ex-GM guy, ran a bunch of GM factories, but he's like, where the car comes off the line, where the car disconnects from the production line and goes to brake test and alignment and all of that. He's like, that we call that final line. FL300 was the station. That was the locomotive that pulled the entire 6 million square feet of Fremont, right? You had a pace. You had to make 12, 14 cars an hour, whatever the time was when I first took it over. And if you weren't pulling those 14 cars an hour because the line was stopped, the rest of the shops got backlogged. And when you get backlogged, people lose attention or you stop in the middle of an operation. If the line stops and you're shooting adhesive around the window, you don't stop. You get that window set. Otherwise, you get a customer with a water leak. Well, when lines are going up and down and there's no discipline, people aren't paying attention. It's like a snow day every 7 minutes. It's like being or a substitute teacher in elementary school every 10 minutes when the line stops. And we were creating quality defects. And one of the first things we did was we parked at the end of the production line, and you had to have me or one of my direct reports say, yes, stop the line. Like, is that defect enough to stop and disrupt the line? We just kept the line moving. And, it changed the way things were seen.
Another thing we've heard from Elon is the production hell. Tell us about that. Did that begin when you were there?
Oh, they had been in production hell. They had gone, I forgot what they called the project. When I showed up in 2014, in 2014, they were just converting back to that Toyota Tundra line. Before that, they were building like Model S's by hand on like mobile AGVs. And there was a whole big project. I forget the name they called it. That was to get Model S production back on the Tacoma line, right? So they were in production hell then, right? And then all through the time when I took over powertrain, we were in battery and motor hell. Like, we were having problems making batteries and motors. And so it was just this rolling problem, and stamping would have their time in the barrel and paint would have their time in the barrel. So it just rolled around, and it was the same symptom I saw when I took over Model X was, unless there's that demand, unless there's that, the analogy I use to people is they say, if you're running on a treadmill and you can have a conversation versus 1 to 3 word answers, you're not running hard enough, right? Like the factory never hit that clip, right? So that's what I think was mostly the production hell up till like when I got involved in X and then the Model 3 madness, right?
Like the people working on the line didn't understand that doing a line stoppage is a big deal. Like it's a failure of the entire group. First of all, were you able to get more of that baked in after you said, all right, look, nobody can stop the line unless they run it through me first? Like, did that start to clarify some of it?
What I had seen was that people were trying to live up to this ethos of the Toyota production system, but you can't do it half-assed. You have to fully live it. Like the reason you stop a line is to countermeasure, which is an immediate fix, and then you drive a root cause action, which could be a tooling change, could be something by the supplier, and you put things in place, and those things just weren't happening. So people didn't take line stoppages seriously. And then when you're not working at pace and you don't have someone walking the line, like I spent a lot of my time walking the line and just saying, why is this station stopped? A line. And when I did relinquish control back shortly, I kept him for the first few weeks. It was like myself or one of my directs was only people really allowed to stop the line without catching holy hell. Once we started relinquishing that back, it went down. I was director. I had senior managers, associate managers, supervisors. It was a thick org because there's 600 people on the line, right? So you need those layers. And when I started pushing that downhill, I would still show up and I go, why's my line down, right? And I would push it to the person in the station, hey, we had a door panel and a fastener cracked and we couldn't get the door panel to seat right. But I would still go to the person running the end of the line, that 300 station, what we would call a money line. We'd ring the gong when the car came off perfect at that line. I'd walk up to him, how many cars this hour? He'd be like, 21. I was like, this is Goodfellas, guys. It's 22 cars. Fuck you, pay me. I was like, you owe me an extra car next hour. How am I supposed to do that? Figure it out. And I'd walk away. But when you do that with guys and you're dead serious, like, look, you better pull 23 cars off that line next hour before lunch because we have a commitment. We have a boat leaving for Europe. We were shipping cars. It was like, once you started putting the pressure on people and taking things seriously, it starts up in the game. And that's when the knock-on effects of the factory starting to tighten up. It's like, hey, why do I have a ripped seat? Because I have no discipline about tools and pockets. Why do I have marred paint? Because I have people not wearing their company-issued uniform. I got jeans and I got sweatshirts with zippers. Well, I'm going to tell the guy, look, come in tomorrow and you factory thing, but I'm going to write the supervisor up that let him. Like, and I beat the hell out of my management team. I was tough on the line for folks, but the line folks, they don't control their world. They come in, you give them a job, you give them something. So you have to have compassion with them and you have to have a rapport with them. But if you were a line lead, an associate manager, a manager, a senior manager, my org, it was open season. You got both barrels rustled if I saw you F up. And people know that. There's guys working there still telling stories of how bad they got stopped on the line. And it made impacts on them and they handed those things down. So that became when the factory started tightening up. Is like, look, I can't tell these guys that the door doesn't fit right. I'm not a sheet metal guy. We give the problems, but I can tell them that there will be no effing scratch cars today from poor workmanship, right?
All right.
Control what you can control.
All right. So a year later, what was Elon's reaction to
Elon, he
your
was happy. We got cars out. We had problems. Like we were passing defects. Like we were fixing cars after the fact. Like if I had a ripped seat, I'd never stop a line for a ripped seat. We can fix the ripped seat and end the line. And that became a whole big thing because you were moving the problem. Like if I could not solve the problem on the line and it wasn't a problem that was discipline and operational hygiene that we could fix, is just, hey, I'm teaching you how to put this thing in better. I'm landing this bolt better, using this tool better, right? We would push those defects down the line because the line is a time machine. If you're supposed to get 20 cars an hour, that's a car every 3 minutes, right? If I miss a car, I miss $30,000 or $40,000 worth of cash flow, right? Because that car gets sold, profit or not. So I treated the line as a time machine. There was no way to go back, right? And that created problems that Elon wasn't happy about. I don't want to go into those too much. Those are some ugly problems. But at the end of the day, we started building pace. We started getting cars out of the factory. It started really showing that, okay, the folks who are running the assembly line now are taking operational responsibility. Let's push back on engineering responsibility or equipment responsibility or supplier responsibility. Because when you're running like a bunch of frat boys, no one believes you that the window glass is no good.
In those years, the scrutiny of Tesla in the media grew like exponentially. And the stock prices going up. Everyone's talking about Tesla. To what extent did the media like circus and the scrutiny, influence or affect you or any of the folks that were working on the floor? Were you aware of it? Did you hear it? Did you care? Did it matter?
Oh, we heard it every day, all day. But what really mattered was just getting the job done. Honestly, like that's where it focused back in on team. Like I had a tight team, and I crafted that team pretty well. And a lot of those folks are still they're senior managers now. Folks that started as supervisors and associate they're senior managers in Texas, or they're senior managers in Reno, or they went to Buffalo. Like so, a lot of the folks from my time and some of my other directors ended up rising up in the organization, even though we've moved on, because they took those lessons, right? So the external stuff was a big factor. Hey, we're here in this, we're here in quality. There was an accident, there was this quality defect. I used to get absolutely slayed by, if you don't, Jerome Gilliam. Like, so Jerome was like, I loved him. Brilliant guy. He was Mercedes trucks. He's a great guy, but he would just kick my ass 6 ways to Sunday about quality. Because like Russell, people are buying $120,000 cars, and they got a loose bolt under his seat. Every day he would walk down to the end of the line when they were doing inspections, and he would come back with 3 or 4 red Solo cups with parts and fasteners. And we found this shit in his French. Russell, there was this shit in the car. This is unacceptable. And he kicked my ass. And I'd go hand out the ass beatings down the line. And the next day it would come back as 2 cups. And the next day it would come back as 1 cup. And then a week later, he was back to 4 cups. And it was just this discipline thing. But you buy a $120,000 car, you expect quality, right? And the gee whiz factor of a Tesla was a saving grace for a long time. I mean, the cars are great. Like we know, I own them, you own them, like they drive them. But he was right. Like he taught me a lot as well, and so we drove that. But it was, the external stuff when you hear, hey, people are complaining about quality defects, and you feel bad. You're like, man, that person bought that car they've been dreaming about for 2 years on a wait list, and they had a bad experience. You're like, that. And you would get those stories down to the line folks and make those line folks feel it.
So you eventually left Tesla. When was that?
That was late 2017. I had a couple teenage daughters, and I was kind of forgetting what they looked like, and I wasn't being the person who I should have been. And there's a lot of contributing factors to that. But yeah, it was a lot like that. That was after Model 3 launch. We had launched Cato Road, which is where we built the first 200 or 300 Model 3s by hand. Right, we went over there, set up a pilot line, took all the best line operators and like supervisors and leads, and built the first couple hundred Model 3s by hand to understand the car. And then they set up the brick, which is what they called the Unstoppable Elliott Dreadnought. And that's a whole other podcast of what was learned in that. But it was the brick was interesting, right?
Because I want to hear about the next company, which was Zipline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not even the final chapter.
No,
because
no.
there's another huge chapter. Tell us about your time at Zipline.
So when I left Tesla, I was running S and X and Model 3 assembly in the early Model 3 launch, like 3, 4, 5 months into it, and that was 2,300 indirect people on my team, right? So I had all the general assembly. Like it was that's like a division in the military. And I was burned. I was like, nothing but, my entire day was just crisis level problems. And got a chance to go talk to the folks over at Zipline in Half Moon Bay, and they were building drones, and they were delivering blood in rural Africa. And like, if they could get 2 units of blood to a woman who was having postnatal bleeding after, delivering a baby, 95% of the time they'd save a life. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I was like, I'm building electric cars, help the planet, make a lot of money, great. But I was like, and I kind of love the Zipline mission, and Keenan and Keller are like brilliant guys, absolutely brilliant guys. Like, and it was a great company. And I went to 23 direct reports. I had like 23 people on the shop floor. So I descaled like that personal contact by a factor of 100. And, building drones by hand. And it was their 3rd or 4th iteration of drones. And, we were building things by hand and sourcing parts from China and learn how to bond carbon fiber and put electronics together. And I did that for about a year with a lot of interesting people and personalities, and they weren't ready for scale. And, I was a scale guy, and I was running an ERP system, and I didn't want to install and run an ERP system. And there was like a lot of different things there. And those guys, like, it was a great decision that I had left. Like, Keenan and Keller treated me like champions on the way out. I can't speak well enough about those guys. Like, just Keenan's absolutely brilliant in robotics. I don't know if you know Keenan Aerobic. He's part of Willow Garage, which is where Ross Robot Operating System spun out. The guy's brilliant. And then Keller, professional rock climber, Stanford guy, like Harvard guy, like, motivational human being and absolutely like machine on the mission. And it wasn't the right place for me in their growth curve. And they're actually, like, I watched them and they're now starting to hit their growth curve, and I'm excited for them. And there's a lot of brilliant people there, right? It was good. Like, I learned a lot, and I fell in love with that early stage. I don't know if they were an A or B round by that time, but Tesla was well past that when I was there. So I kind of fell in love with that. And so spent the year there, and it was a good experience for me, but I wasn't the right person for that place at the right time. Right.
And then you got the founder bug.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a friend, and we were looking and going, hey, what are big problems? Like, founders go, okay, what are big problems? And I'm not a SaaS software guy, and I'm not a med tech guy or fintech. I'm like, I want to build things. And we started looking, and, this is 2000, end of 2018, early 2019, when I had left Zipline. And I was like, I want to build things, but, I see this country, kind of the rudder is stuck in the wrong direction. And we started talking, and then me and my friend, we looked and we were like, housing underpins anything, right? The American dream is underpinned by a house, a picket fence, a couple of kids, a spouse, a dog, right? That little slice of Americana, however you want to envision it, whether it's a walk up in the city, or it's 3 acres out and, semi-exurb all the ways out, the, drive till you qualify. But it was houses. And we looked at it and we said, hey, houses are terrible to build. They haven't changed since like pre-World War II. And we ran across Icon, and, Icon was 3D printing concrete. And I looked at that, and I had done a lot of plastic extrusion and material mixing and stuff. And I was like, I looked a little bit into what Jason Ballard and the team was doing at Icon. I was like, I think they're onto something, but I'm not sure if I like what they're doing, right? Because as an engineer, if you look at something and it's not absolutely perfect, like the iPhone, like, you're like, I can do better, right? So there was nothing wrong with what they were doing. It just wasn't how I would do it. So partner and I decided, hey, we were going to pull some of our own money and try to take a stab at it.
Right. So that company, that was named after the Neil Stephenson book.
Yeah, Diamond Age, right? If you don't know, folks,
that's how we met.
Yes.
And I remember I went on Twitter and I said I'd just moved to Scottsdale. And I'm like, what tech people do we know? And we had a phone call. You said something really interesting on that call, which is like the pivot point. I'm like, I really like this guy. You said that like startups, like manufacturing, even defense, this isn't 2 years ago. Like, these should not be like, we shouldn't politicize technologies. Like, we have to like do stuff. We have to be above politics when we make decisions and when we talk about a company. Can you unpack that, because that is like a through line to defense?
Yeah.
And talk about your point of view.
Yeah. So, when you look at it, manufacturing is hard, and manufacturing takes a long time, even when you're really fired on all cylinders and you have the funding and you have the right team. And the political cycle is measured in minutes, right? Like, the wind blows. Like, look what happened over the weekend with DeepSeek, right? Like, I would hate to be anybody's working on AI right now with that BS in the background. It's like, but the structural things that make a country independent and a place you want to live and affluent and fun and respected on the world stage shouldn't change every 2-year congressional election or every 4-year presidential election cycle. You need that presence of mind. You need that long view. And, as a manufacturing guy, where projects are always measured, you want to do something, you're going to do something big. You're talking, 24, 36 months, you can move faster, and people have learned how to move faster, but you have to be outside of that, because, you're going to build a factory for food. You're going to build a factory for building materials. You're going to build a steel mill. You're going to build a power plant. You can't just like this is not weather, right? Like climate and weather. Weather is what's happening outside my window right now. Climate is a 10-year trend. Like, so manufacturing needs to be on that long-term trend where people are going to plant a tree they'll never stand in the shade of. I mean, whoever said that, right? Like whatever philosopher quotes you want to say, but you're going to build a plant and you're going to spend a couple of years there. And by the time it's done, you're going to be burned, right? So it's like, you have to understand that if you're going to put time and effort into manufacturing and you're going to succeed as a country, it has to transcend whichever way the pennants and the flags are blowing today, because you need it. Unless you're making like political flags, it's like, hey, you know, it's like whatever you're manufacturing, you're probably doing it for a solid reason, and it's going to outlast a lot of things that you've done in your career. So it needs to be permanent, and it needs to have that head down backing to let it just mature and manifest.
A lot of VC and Valley money has decided that material goods, hard tech, real estate, building houses, robotics, this whole thing, right? It's opening up. I'm seeing a bunch of people who do come from the software world where scaling in the grand scheme of things is not that hard. Hey, we think we have a good technological solution, but we're going to have to invest 4 years to even get it off the ground. Like what would you say to those people?
Having worked for a lot, having had co-founders who were, digital natives, like software folks, right? Code, controls, and had not built things, it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve for people. And I get that all the time on Twitter. People like, hey, what do I do to learn about manufacturing? I'm like, spend time in factories. Like, there is no replacement for putting in the hours on the floor. And you don't have to necessarily assemble things or, work night shifts, but the pulse of a factory, like, it was just a little Twitter discourse of, hey, people were talking about factory tours and how can I learn? I'm like, that is good. But as a manufacturing, when I was making Gatorade bottles, people were like, we should bring the sales folks on the floor and let them see how it's done. I'm like, absolutely not. I was like, because they're going to oversimplify. A 1-hour tour just makes it look easy, right? A few days or a week on the floor, you start to get the nuances of what do you do when people don't show up? What do you do when you have a process problem? What do you do when you have hard downtime, right? So it's exposure, and it's not a gatekeep. It's an advice to say, look, how do you learn to code? Sit down at a console, start figuring out problems, right? Read NP hard problems, like read things to say, okay, how do I do sorts? How do I do this efficiently, right? There's a base of knowledge in code, right? That sits on GitHub that you can go learn and pull and watch people, right? There's a base of YouTube videos. Everybody that works with me, I bomb them with YouTube videos. Hey, we're going to take this section at minute 319 and we're going to put it with this from this other video at minute 712. And this is what I want to do, because manufacturing people are super visual, right? And you can see where the geniuses have come before you of how to fixture something, how to assemble and hold something. So it really becomes as much exposure to things getting built as possible. Watch them make glass bottles, watch them make cement, watch a steel mill roll stuff. The videos are amazing. Like, I wish I had that when I was coming up. Excuse me. I think it really is go look at things, and then the folks who are coding, they'll go, all right, so how am I tracking that in software? How do they know the ratio when they squeeze a steel beam between two rollers, a steel slab that's 12 inches, they squeeze it down to 8? How do they know how to control that line speed and the tension? And they'll start thinking about the problems where they're going to have their hands on, hey, what's next generation controls? How do I control torque? How do I control speed? So it really opens people up to that, is just watch a lot of manufacturing videos. And if you go into a factory, talk to people and go find the people that, like, you sit at a counter at a Waffle House and you watch a good cook. He's like balancing on one leg because he's kicking a door open to get more eggs with his right leg. You watch the folks in the factory who look like they're in a zone. Don't interrupt them because they're in a zone, but watch what they're doing and watch what a good laid out process looks like, or watch what somebody that's got their tools set, if they're doing assembly work, where all their tools are and their parts and how they're going through it, right? It just becomes that, learn by example. And I think that I've done that a lot with folks, and the smart ones, most of them, they start seeing pieces where, hey, so how am I going to control this actuator that's going to pin and hold this thing so I could drill it?
there was and I don't even remember who it was, and I wouldn't call him out if I did, but there was somebody in the kind of neo manufacturing space on Twitter that was talking about, man, I've really started on our line, like properly binning and like putting all of our stuff in bins. And then there was another, group of haters going, yeah, man, that's like 101, like things go in a box. And I do not necessarily know that you have that explanation either, but I do think that there's something like even people that I would call, the really cranky Unix engineers, people who think in a very similar way to what a manufacturing person needs to think. Just that switch into anything physical, and also that multimodal thing. Like when you talk about having to kick a door open, it's like
Oh,
manufacturing,
and
even if it's
every place
literally
I
you're
go
just,
into, it gets
hitting
slapped
a
out of
button
me
at the
really
right
quick. I
time or
think I'm
pulling
better than I
a
am.
lever
Like
at the right
when I
time.
learn something,
Even just the
new
physicality
processes,
of it
yes.
is a different.
I'll take the side road and loop it back on you a little bit to say, look, go on there and watch these guys in Pakistan casting a 6-foot propeller in sand, wearing flip-flops in a shop that like OSHA folks would stroke out if they walked into. No one's out of control. They're doing work. They're working with hot metal. They're working hot, but they're making it, and they're not letting anything stop them, right? Like, and you think about that, and we have the advantage of work safety law. We have the advantages of automation. We have the advantages of CNC and different things. But at the end of the day, there's only so many ways. And I was thinking about this before. It's like you think about additive manufacturing and subtractive manufacturing and transforming, like heat treating and working. There's not a lot of different true when you break the processes down, right? There's only so many ways to move atoms around. And until you can get to some sci-fi level of, a diamond age, a matter compiler, where you've got a stream of 60 elements connected to a printer and it's injecting one sodium molecule where you need it and one cobalt molecule when you need. Till we can get to that, we're still going to be casting and forging metal and then cutting it and grinding it and polishing it. And, we'll interject some 3D printed and additive manufacturing and different processes. It's all over the place, but at the end of the day, you're trying to move. And they say, bits versus atoms. You're working in the world of, hey, I have a gross product. I have to change it. I have to do what the construction guys do. Construction is taking a lot of big things and cutting them into smaller things and sticking them together to make one big thing, right? One of my partners taught me that. It's like, so manufacturing is the same thing. It's like, look, I'm taking steel, I'm taking aluminum, I'm taking glass. I'm figuring out how to make a microwave. I'm winding copper around steel to make a magnetron to get the but it's like all of these processes, now you can make them totally hands off. Like I've seen a lot of hands off manufacturing, but if you're in Pakistan, what you have, and you're hand winding starter motors because that's what the market needs.
Lightning round questions. I know your grandfather. Are you not?
Sort of, yes.
Um, manufacturing jobs in the age of artificial intelligence and automation, are they here to stay?
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Like, I look at Optimus, I look at Figure, like Brett Adcock and the team over there. I know some guys at Aptronic doing that. So, like, I love what they're doing, right? That's hard. Like, it's beyond me hard problems on some of those things. Those will have a lot of uses, but then you're still going to see, we call a 6 degree of freedom, a Fanuc, a yellow Fanuc, or an orange Kuka, or a gray Yaskawa Motorman robot picking up and with a drill tool drilling holes or cutting or welding, right? The humanoid form factor is going to take automation to places it hasn't been, right? But bespoke instances of automation end up freeing you up when you're looking at like shaving pennies, right? Like when you want things to be ultra low cost, it is good to say, hey, I'm going to take 12 Optimus bots and I'm going to put them on this BMW line and they're going to replace people. But a manufacturing engineer would say, hey, I'm going to find the right volume. I'm going to find the right process and the right tools. I'm not just going to replace a human with an automated version of a human. I'm going to go to that first principles of what am I making? If I'm making a PCB to drive your seat heater, right? I don't need a human hand to assemble that. I can get a robot to assemble that, or can I get that to one printed circuit so there is no assembly? I print it in a solder bath, and you all your deposit layers, like all the things you do. So you take it back to, what are you trying to do? The Elon thing, everybody's cliche with first principles, but at the end of the day, humanoids and AI are going to make manufacturing a lot different and a lot better. But I still think, I can't imagine what's going to be faster in anything in punch and steel in a punch press, like a CNC punch press. You're not going to have a humanoid with hand and tools and go, now I don't need a punch press. So it is just.
Well, you said something. I remember when you were still at Diamond Age, you said something about how one could automate the majority and potentially someday all of the construction of a home, but that it didn't make sense. I forget who it was, a philosopher you cited, said there was actually an optimum level of automation, and it wasn't 100%. I
No.
explain that.
Yeah, and I'm drawing a blank on the philosopher quote, but at the end of the day, why would you want an automated process for, like, setting doorknobs, right, in a house? Like, that's a hard job. Like, if you set a doorknob and you bend the little thing so when somebody opens the front door and the house air pressure changes, and do you want your office door or your bathroom door to rattle a little bit? There's a way to bend that. I probably, at some point in time, the guys at Figure or Optimus, they'll figure out how to do that. But at the end of the day, is it really worth, you're going to put on 13 doorknobs in an average house? Is it really worth, right, coming up with an automation system that's a $3 or $5 million automation thing to set doorknobs? Or can you just engineer that doorknob so it just clicks, quarter turn, you drive one screw, you align it for 6 or 10 seconds, you close the door 3 times, and it's done. Like, at the end of the day, people are fast and flexible. People are the ultimate manifestation of automation. They just happen to be carbon-based, not steel-based, right? It's like, people are the ultimate automatons. It's just, it sucks if that's the only part of the job you get to think about.
Best first-person shooter currently available for PC or Xbox.
Been going down the Stalker 2 rabbit hole.
Not Helldivers 2?
Oh, Helldivers is a blast, but Helldivers is third person, right?
I'm glad that you called him out. I rarely get to own Alex.
I know. I got that wrong.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Best metal band you saw at Lemore's.
Oh, I would probably have to say my boys Anthrax. I mean, I'm a diehard Slayer fan, but Anthrax, beyond a doubt. Now, hair metal, the Queensryche guys, nicest people on the planet. Like,
I listened to Take Hold of the Flame last night on Vibe.
nice,
Very good.
nice. Like, yeah. So, but you brought the girls to the hair metal brand, and you brought your friend, your boys to Anthrax. So,
Russell, thank you so much for coming on. This won't be the last time that we have you.
And can you tell us the name? Wait, can you tell us the name of the defense company that you just joined, or is it still secret?
Still a little secret.